Well, welcome back, everybody. I didn't really need to plug the question asking too much this time. I've got a bit of a book here. There's no way we can get through all these questions, so I've tried to sort of order them so that we can get all our panel to say something against one or other of the questions. So I'd like to welcome back the speakers from the earlier session, and also Robert White from DEC and Keith Heslop from CNR. Right, an awful lot of these questions are focused in a governmental direction, so I'll try to make sure that the questions nudge along the line, but I think I'm going to have to bounce back to Robert for the next question. Will the Secretary of State have the power to overturn existing tariff-based agreements in favour of OPEX sharing agreements and potentially decommissioning sharing?
The legislation that we have for setting terms, it's been around for over 35 years. There's nothing that explicitly says that we can't overturn existing agreements, but we've always taken the approach that it would be inappropriate to change existing agreements without adequate compensation, and the end result might be that no one is actually any better off. So I think we'd probably carry on with that, but I think for the future we'll have to look at all options. But yeah, I think it's agreements that have been signed in the past, then people would expect those to be kept to, if unless there was going to be some compensation to allow for that. So without wishing to say it couldn't happen, I think in practice changing existing agreements is probably not something we would be too keen on doing without a good argument, and really the legislation is much more geared at getting access for new developments. That's the purpose, and that's what it was intended for.
Thank you. The next question also is, to meet the stewardship aspirations expressed by Team C, how do we invest in DEC to give them the capability to do this and to steer us to an acceptable holistic solution? I think I'm going to go to the other end of the panel and ask Jonathan if he can comment on that one.
If you look at DEC's involvement so far, we've had significant involvement both from Robert and Simon Toole. Both Robert and Simon actually not only involved in the steering group, but also spending significant time working within the work groups themselves. So we've had great support from DEC so far. I think if you look at the challenges, we all know, DEC are a very small team, hugely busy. We're a big industry. There's lots of requirements on DEC, and areas that we are talking to them on as can we provide more support directly from industry into DEC itself. There's obviously some benefits and some downsides with that, but it's certainly not been an issue as far as this work stream's gone so far, DEC's involvement. And I think as we sort of look forward with regard to the work, I think it's going to require both the industry and DEC to be pretty strong as we look at some of the recommendations that might come out. If we're looking for some brave new solutions for the future, I think both parties here, DEC and ourselves, need to sort of meet those challenges, sort of face on and be willing to tackle them. Okay,
let's move on. Thank you. How might a hub project be incentivised to take on board the description of considering giving a hand up over the wall? Big planning in capability that is initially surplus. Right. I think that's an Una question.
Okay. I think there are a couple of key elements here. When we look at the data, and I may not have made this point earlier, we're up against a time barrier here. So if we just continue to explore at the rate that we've been exploring to date, we're not going to get there fast enough in order to use the hubs that are already there. We probably need another 20 years to explore the basin, and we don't have it. We've got to do it by 2030. So the first point is that we've got to work collaboratively ourselves and work out what are the economic prospects that need to be developed as we go forward before we go to the government and say, and now we need an incentive. I would like to think that this will trigger a different way of working. But we've also got that point, rather small but very significant, called integrity of the pipeline and integrity of the hub. So we've got to somehow balance the stewardship, the collaboration, and the incentivization at the same time. It may mean we need a different type of person in the industry, or we need to start engaging with more commercial people, because Nigel's already identified there's a speed issue here. So it's about the industry standing back and saying, what do I need to do differently? Who do I need to employ? Where do I need to deploy them in order to unlock this potential?
Thanks, Una. I'm cracking on, so apologies. I'll try and get through as many as I can. Right, next one. I think this is more a statement, but I'm going to maybe ask Nigel to make a comment on the statement. Might equitable distribution of risk and reward be a blocker? Risk is best managed by those best competent, with those with the best competence in knowledge and resource to manage it. Equitability sounds superficially beneficial, but should be challenged as an objective. I told you they weren't going to be easy.
Well, I think it talks to a more general point, and it was one of the ones that was on Mark's slide, about what we term an equitable distribution of risk and reward. And I think, all of us in the infrastructure business know that those who are developing resources are taking significant risk and making some challenging and difficult investments and need to achieve adequate return for that. I think the point that's been well discussed in this group is that when we look at the late life of infrastructure, we look at the need to invest to sustain and extend the life of the host platforms and the pipelines and the terminals onshore, that investments are also being made by the infrastructure owners, and therefore there needs to be a fair return on that investment that can be secured through the deals they do with the third parties.
Thank you. I think the next question I maybe ask Mark to answer to begin with, and maybe Keith, you want to address the last point. It's to what extent should decommissioning be part of infrastructure access negotiations, and is this included in ICOP? Well, I know it isn't included in ICOP at the moment, but...
Yeah, an interesting question. We've identified clearly that, as I mentioned, the risks in terms of extending the life of infrastructure is very much overlapping eventually with the sort of decom picture. We've sort of touched upon it in terms of this concept of infrastructure unbundling. Clearly it is an issue in terms of the liabilities associated with future decom in terms of that scenario. We haven't ruled it out. It's clearly a difficult one. It's one that would need, the current decom rules are set around a certain fiscal arrangement. They're about to be reinforced next year. So I think that is an area to look at, but it's a longer term one in our view at the moment.
Keith?
The ICOP document itself is a guideline. So within that guideline, it does detail that decommissioning is one of those topics that needs to be discussed between both parties. I think it's advisable that the requester and the owner have those discussions on decom as soon as possible. Things to consider as part of that decommissioning discussion is who's taking title to the kit, how much kit's been installed, and when will it actually be decommissioned, and what's the likely cost of that decommissioning. It depends ultimately on the return and the risk that either party is willing to take on. But it's certainly there as a topic for discussion, but it certainly doesn't give a solution.
Okay. This is a related question, so if you want to come back or anybody else. If an operator provides a platform which is no longer producing to act as a hub, what does that do to their decommissioning liability? Okay. If an operator provides a platform to which it is no longer producing to act as a hub, what does that do to their decommissioning liability?
I guess my understanding in that is it wouldn't actually change their decommissioning liability. The benefit for the infrastructure owner is that it would defer their decommissioning liability. It doesn't transfer it as such. They're still responsible for decommissioning their facility. However, there are clearly benefits with pushing that decommissioning back.
Yes. Thanks, Jonathan. Right. This is maybe one in your direction as well, Jonathan. Is there an opportunity for regional clubs of operators, perhaps under the auspices or facilitation, I'd use the word rather than auspices, of Oil and Gas UK, to understand aggregation of demand in these areas?
I think very much so, and there has been a number of areas actually tried in the past. So, as I say, it's when I was talking earlier, it's not a new issue. I've talked to a number of companies. There was clearly a lot of work went on in the West of Shetlands where operators came together to look at, I guess, the best solution. There was an activity that went on in the southern North Sea where there was a commercial solution looking at how to pull a group of companies and assets together to develop that. So there has been quite a lot of work going on. I think where it struggled is to deliver, actually. So you look at a number of the areas where it's worked, it generally doesn't get over the finishing line. Why is that? I guess there's all sorts of reasons, but maybe one operator's ready to go quicker than others because there's maybe a bit of appraisal to do in one of the fields and they want to go, so they break away from the pack. So I think there is definitely an area to do that. I think the key question for me is a sort of voluntary coming together enough, or actually do we need to take a stronger deck view also of what's best from an overall regional perspective when we're looking at maximising recovery.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think what's different about the work that we're doing today is that it's also shining a light on when cessation of production actually is. And what I'm hoping is that it will get people to realise that there's a time frame here. If we don't explore and work together quickly enough, we're going to run out of time. But if there's transparency around what those dates are, it may trigger a different way of thinking and working.
Yeah, great, thanks. Maybe a question in your direction as well, Una. Ullage, what is the story when it comes to taking into account the operating constraints of produced water, etc.?
That's a difficult question. I thought somebody might pick up on that. I think that's what we've got to understand. So the figures that we quoted today were purely around oil. But clearly we need to get to that picture and look at what the water story is and understand where the real balance is. So more to come on that particular issue.
Yeah. Okay, coming back to the broader picture again, DEC has no fiscal competency. Is a presentation of proposals to pilot enough? Does it not also need to include the Treasury ministers, e.g. at the Fiscal Forum? Jonathan, I think that's probably...
Yeah, and we very much recognise that there's, for those of you who maybe aren't so familiar, there is a fiscal forum where the industry is engaged with Treasury and indeed other parts of government through that, really looking at what do we need to do as a country to maximise our reserves recovery. And there's clearly going to be significant overlap from the work we are doing that we then need to merge the two sort of work streams in some way as we get towards our sort of recommendations. So we very much recognise that and we'll pull it together as we come forward with our recommendations on how we go about that.
Yeah.
Obviously, tax is a matter for Treasury, but I think we're all fairly agreed on the principle that tax should not be a barrier to development. But unfortunately, it's not just good enough to say tax is too high. We need evidence to support this and to make the case to Treasury. So we are open to reasoned and preferably evidence-based arguments that are saying if we do this, it will definitely encourage development. It will definitely make more development happy. We will support those and help to put those arguments forward. I think in the context of some of the slides talked about possibly new business models, then I think it's really important to develop the model first and then see if tax is a barrier to that model and then to take it from there. I think it's important to understand the business models first before we start trying to prejudge whether tax is an issue or it isn't.
Right, Thank you. Right, now this is the question that I was expecting to be on every other sheet of paper. So Nigel, this is the one that you've been expecting to be asked. How open have the major infrastructure hub owners been in engaging in the initiative, and how do they really see value in retaining ownership of their current assets in an extended period, with some potentially compromising positions in commercial terms to support the smaller reserve owners?
Well, I think I'll talk maybe first about the pipelines, Paul. I think one of the things that distinguishes the pipeline business is that really we have no business at all except that which our customers are kind enough to entrust to us. And I think the record of some of the pipeline systems in terms of their engagement and the number of fields and facilities that they serve shows that they have over time taken quite a broad perspective. I can speak for the Forties pipeline system which we operate. We have over 73 fields currently connected to our system, and we're in discussion with another 15 or 16 at the moment about possible future connections. So I think that's really quite a broad perspective. For those who are owning hubs, the host hubs, and looking at the opportunities of third-party business against their own production from the fields, I think the position is more complicated because they are aware that the rewards to their own production generally are far greater than the opportunities which traditionally have been provided by third-party tariff income. And I think, the owners of these large hubs are all rational commercial companies and make their judgments accordingly. So that's why I think if we are going to look at late life extensions and developments to serve third parties beyond their normal term, we will need to think hard about the business models that endure at that point.
Great.
Yes. And just to add to that, what the data is clearly showing today is that in the future, it's the users who have more interest in the hubs as opposed to the current owners. So in terms of when you actually look at who owns the prospectivity, there comes a point at which the owners cease to be the major party who are interested. And that's what's going to cause the interesting dynamic as we go forward in terms of when you get to that stage, who actually then wants to own the infrastructure, and is there actually a valid business?
Okay. I think the next question is sort of a bit on the other side. Maybe Una and Keith can answer this in terms of their working groups rather than their own companies. But was the main representation from the smaller operators as this could put weight behind the results of the blocker analysis? Does the integrity of the pipeline cause reasons for concern to access? And how open have the operators been, specifically the hub owners, in potentially sharing their information?
Yeah, I had at least 3 questions in there. So let's try and tackle that. I think when the group was initially set up, it was kind of self-volunteering in terms of who participated. But we began to recognise that we needed this balance between small and large operators. Small, yeah, is that the right term? I'm not offending anybody by that statement. And so as time's gone on, the actual makeup of these teams has changed to ensure that we get that balance. And in fact, it was specifically that we had to go out and get the larger owners and make sure that they were represented at all of the different groups in order that we got that balance. So I'm fairly comfortable, guys, I think you are too, that we've got a right mix in terms of people going forward. I've lost the thread now.
Keith, yeah, it's really, I mean, just we're talking about where how has the experience in the work groups been going from the infrastructure owner's perspective, and how's it been going from the smaller development owner perspective?
If I can focus on Workstream A, we were kind of looking after base business, so it was looking at the Energy Act, seeing what changed, seeing what new powers the Secretary of State had, and making sure they were incorporated both in the debt guidance that was sent out, plus the oil and gas UK guidance that we send out in conjunction with DEC. There's no point sending out guidance if it's one way. It becomes a diktat rather than a working together type document. So it was important in Workstream A that we had a balance across the super majors right down to the independents. So although it was, we asked for volunteers, we were actually quite happy with the uptake from the parties involved, that we did have a fair balance across the spectrum. So hopefully, once you see the guidance, you'll see it is balanced. Key focus will be on a new section called Section 9, which captures the issues that need to be considered as you go through each stage of a development. And hopefully there's enough balance there, enough comments in there to show that it reflects both on the service requester and the infrastructure owner.
And just to mention, I think I said this earlier, but once we got our analysis of the basin, certainly in the northern North Sea, we've been out to the owners of the infrastructure to verify that the results are correct. Because what we didn't want to do was put out data and then find that the COP dates were wrong. We're going to do that on the central North Sea and on the southern North Sea. And as we've said, we're going to establish this day on the 25th of September, where we're going to invite all owners and users to come and look at the story that's developing, because we do want that input, we want the feedback to know that we're putting accurate information out. So for the final report.
Yeah.
So there is a request for people to participate if they haven't done so to date.
Yeah, I think that's a good message, is that there's still room for engagement if you haven't been participating to this point.
Right. Paul, if I can...
Mark, maybe you might have some thoughts in terms of your work group on that last couple of questions, but maybe I can give you another question to go alongside that. Increasing E&A activity will allow development before the infrastructure is decommissioned. How do we enhance the E&A activity?
No, that's a good question. We hinted at E&A throughout the presentation this morning, and clearly it's not quite the sort of Damocles. It is out there, and it is fundamentally the biggest driver in terms of delivering the volumes and the production potential that we need to sustain infrastructure. And all of us agree that is something that we need to encourage. I think what's interesting from the infrastructure, just looking at this concept of aggregation, is that clearly if you follow this concept of aggregated prospects, aggregated discoveries, host criticality, it's not beyond the stretch of imagination to then suggest that the E&A incentives should also be focused potentially around that criticality. Now that's an interesting challenge, because traditionally, as you know, we have a license system which is independent. It tends to be at the wish and the interest of the particular investor. Then the question is, how do you guide that investor to particular regions within the basin? So it throws up a large number of issues around longevity of existing infrastructure and ensuring that the E&A work, we would like more E&A, full stop. UNA already identified that current progress would probably only deliver one new prospect tie-in per year, potentially. You know, those are fundamental statistics that we need to look harder at in terms of doing it quicker, basically, within the short time frame. That sort of answers the second question, just to comment on the previous one, just to assure those as well in the room that the workstream C, and we've not talked about majors and minors or small companies. I think the key focus, as Keith has said, and Eunice reinforced, is it's between those who are traditionally the host owners and those who are now potentially the third parties or the users of the future. And as we know, there is overlap. In fact, in quite a number of areas, there's quite significant overlap. And that's important, because that's also then should facilitate the concept of transparency and sharing information.
Great, thanks very much. Now, you may have thought I'd been sort of quite quick in moving from one to the other, but you'll be pleased to know that I've just covered about half of the questions that came back, but hopefully the interesting half and many of the others would have been covered as well. What I think I might do is ask the one last question and then bounce along. We're running out of time, so if the speakers could be very quick, maybe just one answer. And that question is, what would be the three, just one each, I think, three key behavioural changes that the panel would like to see us all doing differently from today? quick as you like. Do you want to start, Robert?
I think the big change that I'd like to see, and I think it's actually needed, is much more collaborative working. I think that's to get these small discoveries and prospects developed. People need to work together. That we've seen there's a lot of small things around, and the only way, in fact, to get something developed is to collaborate, work together. It's always been difficult in the past, but I think it's a necessity.
I was going to say more love in the room when negotiating, but I think Robert's stolen that one. So I think more discussion to understand each other's viewpoint. We tend to come at negotiations at some point like that, rather than like that. And it's key that we need to try and understand each other's viewpoints as to why a particular party is taking a particular stance. That may help resolve conflict.
Great, thanks. Mark?
I'll be slightly controversial probably and say that I think we need to, if there was a behaviour tomorrow, it would be do what we're meant to be doing under the current ICOP. Because there are still a lot of things that are not happening, particularly in transparency, publishing of historical information, that it's not happening. And if we are to not be regulated, then we have to fundamentally do what we said we were going to do as our own organisation, our own industry.
Nigel? Oh, sorry, you know. you were hidden behind everybody then.
My initial word was collaboration, and I think the second word is pace. Pace of exploration, pace of negotiation, pace of tie-back. That's the challenge.
Thank you.
I think I'd echo all that's been said before. I think pace is very important, and I think transparency and some degree of standardisation of contracting arrangements can make a big difference.
Jonathan, last word.
Yeah, and I guess rather than repeating some of those key points, I think the other thing for me is context. So I think if we can provide as an industry context into the key decisions that are being made, and by that I mean the sort of regional oversight we're looking at, pan-industry views, I think we can help and improve and inform the key decisions that are currently being made.
Great. Thanks very much, and thanks everybody. I'd like to, if you could all thank the speakers and the panel. Thank you.